You won't believe what happened to Johana Ngeno in the final 15 minutes before the helicopter went down. At 4:30 p.m., in the middle of a heavy mist and pounding rain in Nandi County, the chopper makes an emergency landing. Villagers gather, the pilot steps out, a brief conversation, a tense atmosphere, and then, just a few minutes later, they take off again. But that is not all. Wait until you hear what witnesses saw in the sky moments before the impact.
Inakuja, kumbe ilikuwa inatafuta emergency landing. Sasa ikatafuta mbaya ipata hapo juu, forest fulani hapo.
Eyewitnesses say that the helicopter was cycling low, struggling, almost searching for something through the thick fog. The weather was brutal, visibility nearly gone, and yet the pilot was reportedly in a hurry to reach the destination. 2 kilometers later, disaster. The aircraft slams into 3 massive trees. It tumbles, it bursts into flames at exactly 4:45 p.m. 6 lives lost in seconds, including Emurua Dikirr MP Johana Ngeno. But here is the part that makes this even more chilling. Just hours before the crash, he was smiling, posting on Facebook, sharing a video from inside the same helicopter, laughing, in high spirits, no sign of what was about to happen. So, what really went wrong in those final moments? Was it weather? Was it pressure to push through the storm? Or was there something else that no one saw coming? The shocking truth behind Johana Ngeno's final flight revealed right now. Before we get into the terrifying sequences of events that led to the crash, I needed to understand something. This was not just another aviation incident. This was a cascade of decisions, weather conditions, and split choices that turned a routine flight into one of the most devastating tragedies in the Kenyan political history. 6 lives gone in an instant, a fireball so intense that local rescuers could not even get close, and a trail of clues from social media posts to eyewitnesses' accounts that piece together a haunting timeline of everything that went wrong. If you're watching this, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear is the full untold breakdown of Johana Ngeno's last day on Earth, and trust me, the details only get more shocking from here. To truly understand the weight of what happened, you need to know who Johana Ngeno was. He was not just any politician. He was a member of parliament of Emurua, Dikirr constituency in Nandi County, a fiery, outspoken legislator known across Kenya for his fearless and often controversial political commentary. On that fateful day, February 28, 2026, Ngeno was in a characteristically high spirit just hours before the tragedy struck. He posted on his official Facebook. The photos showed him smiling, engaged, and full of light. Now, let us talk about the flight itself, because this is where everything starts to unravel. The helicopter, an aircraft registered as 5 Yankee-Delta 5 Bravo, was flying through Nandi County in the Rift Valley region of Kenya. If you know anything about this part of the country, you know that the terrain is hilly, lushy, and beautiful, but also extremely unpredictable when it comes to weather. And on that afternoon on February 28th, the weather was not just bad, but it was catastrophic.
The government eats its own people. Johana Ngeno juzi alikuwa anatetea watu wake huko wakiwa wamebiwa shamba Transmara, akapelekwa mbio na askari kama 300. Huyu ndio kiongozi mmoja tu wa Rift Valley anasema one time.
Eyewitnesses on the ground describe conditions that would make any experienced pilot pause. Heavy rain was falling across the region. Thick, impenetrable mist had rolled in, blanketing the hills and valleys in a grey curtain that reduced visibility to almost nothing. This was not light drizzle or a passing cloud. This was the kind of weather that grounds commercial flights, the kind that turns familiar landscapes into featureless walls of white and grey, and yet the helicopter was still in the air. But wait, because this is not even the most alarming part. Accounts from people who were with the MP earlier on paint a picture that raises serious questions. One of those individuals was engineer Kipchirchir Mosonik. Remember that name because his story is one of the most extraordinary details in this entire tragedy. Mosonik was originally scheduled to be on that helicopter. He was part of the group. He was supposed to fly with Ngeno and the others, but at the last moment, he was bumped from the flight. The reason? There was simply no enough space. The helicopter was full. 6 people were already on board, and there was no room for a 7th passenger. That decision made in a matter of seconds, possibly without thought at all, saved his life. But Mosonik also provided a crucial piece of testimony about the mood on that flight. He noted that the pilot, a man named Jacob Ware, appeared to be in a significant hurry to reach the destination, not cautious, not measured, in a hurry. And in aviation, especially in deteriorating weather condition, hurry is one of the most dangerous words you can use. Now, here is where the timeline becomes razor sharp and every minute matters. At approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, the helicopter did something that tells you everything about how bad the condition had become. It made an unscheduled landing. The aircraft touched down at a place called Chepkiep and a small rural area in Nandi County. This was not a planned stop. This was not on the itinerary. The pilot brought the helicopter down because the rain and mist had become so severe that continuing the flight was at least momentarily not feasible. When the helicopter touched down at Chepkiep, it immediately attracted attention. Villagers in the area, many of whom who had probably never seen a helicopter land this close to their homes, began gathering around the aircraft. It was an unusual sight, and curiosity drew people in. Witnesses later reported that Jacob Ware, the pilot, stepped out briefly and spoke with some of the villagers who had come to see whatever was happening. The conversation was short. There was no long discussion, no extended delays, just a brief exchange of words. And then, after only a few minutes on the ground, the helicopter took off again, and let that sink in. The pilot had landed because conditions were too dangerous to fly. The mist had not cleared. The rain had not stopped. Visibility was severely compromised, and yet, after just a few hours, the decision was made to get back into the air. Why? What was so urgent that it could not wait? What pressure? What schedule? What obligation? What was important enough to override the basic instinct of self-preservation? What happened next is the part of the story that is the hardest to hear, but you need to hear it because it reveals exactly how this tragedy unfolded. After taking off from Chepkiep, the helicopter re-entered the thick blanket of mist and rain that had forced it down in the first place. Eyewitnesses on the ground, people who were outside despite the rain, farmers, residents, villagers going through the daily routines, they heard the helicopter before they saw it, and when they did catch glimpses of it through breaks in the mist, what they described was deeply alarming. The helicopter was flying at a very low altitude, not the kind of low altitude that suggests a confident, skilled descent toward a landing zone. This was the kind of low flying that suggests desperate. The aircraft was circling, going around and around in the air as if searching for something for a way through the mist, searching for the ground, searching for any visual reference that would allow the pilot to orient himself in a world that had turned completely white and grey. Imagine being inside the helicopter, 6 people strapped into their seats, listening to their rotors beating overhead, feeling the aircraft bank and turn, and on the ground, witnesses watched with growing unease. Approximately 2 kilometers from where the helicopter had briefly touched down at Chepkiep, the aircraft struck 3 large trees, not one tree, not a glancing blow, again against a branch, 3 large trees. The impact was catastrophic, and in 10 years, the helicopter, still carrying fuel, still moving with forward momentum, did not simply stop. According to eyewitnesses accounts from people on the ground who saw or heard the collision, the aircraft tumbled, it rolled through the air, and the vegetation breaking apart, metal twisting, rotors shattering, and then it burst into flames. The time was approximately 4:45 in the afternoon, just 15 minutes after the helicopter had taken off from Chepkiep, 15 minutes before, between a decision to fly and a disaster that could never be undone. The fireball that erupted from the crash site was immediate and intense. Local residents who rushed towards the scene, driven by the sound of the impact and the sight of smoke rising through the mist, were met with a horrifying reality. The wreckage of the helicopter was engulfed in flames, so fierce, so overwhelming, that no one could get close enough to help. There were no screams, there were no calls for rescue. The fire consumed everything. When the flames eventually subsided enough for people to approach, the full scale of tragedy became clear. All the 6 occupants of the helicopter were dead. Members of parliament, Johana Ngeno, pilot Jacob Ware, and 4 other souls whose lives ended in those trees in Nandi County. Their bodies were found several meters from the main wreckage, thrown from the aircraft by the force of the impact. The scene was described by first responders and local witnesses as utterly devastating. Debris was scattered across a wide area, pieces of metal fragments of the aircraft, personal belongings, all strewn among the trees and the undergrowth of the Nandi countryside. News of the crash spread rapidly. Within hours, Kenyans across the country were learning that one of their most recognizable members of parliament had succumbed. Social media, the very platform where Ngeno had posted his smiling photos and his helicopter video just hours earlier, was now flooded with shock, grief and disbelief. Political leaders from across the spectrum issued statements of condolences, and the National Assembly held a moment of silence. Flags were lowered, and in Emurua, Dikirr, the constituency that Ngeno had represented with such passion and energy, the grief was raw and overwhelming. People wept openly in the streets, community elders gathered to mourn, schools and businesses closed as the reality sank in that their MP, their voice in Nairobi, was utterly gone. But even as the nation mourned, difficult questions began to surface, questions that demanded answers. Why was the helicopter flying in such extreme weather conditions? What pressure, if any, was placed on the pilots to continue the journey despite the obvious dangers? Was the aircraft properly maintained and inspected? Were the instruments on board sufficient for navigation in low visibility conditions? And perhaps the most painful question of all, could this tragedy have been prevented? The unscheduled landing at Chepkiep is perhaps the most haunting detail. The pilot knew the conditions were dangerous. He made the decision to land. He was on the ground, safe, and then after just a few minutes, he took off again into the very same conditions that had already forced him down. Aviation experts have pointed out that this kind of decision making, where a pilot feels compelled to press on despite adverse conditions, is one of the leading causes of helicopter accidents worldwide. It is known as press-on-itis, a psychological phenomena where the desire to reach a destination overrides rational risk assessment, and in this case, it proved fatal. Johana Ngeno's final day began with laughter, music and a Facebook post full of life. It ended in fire, wreckage and silence. The contrast between those two realities is almost too personal to process. A man who was alive and smiling at a public function just hours earlier, gone. A video recorded from inside the helicopter that would become his coffin, still online for the world to see, and a decision made in a few fleeting minutes at a rain-soaked landing site in Chepkiep that changed everything. This tragedy is a reminder, a brutal and forgiving reminder, that life can pivot from joy to devastation in the space of a heartbeat, that no amount of power, status or political influence can protect you from the forces of nature when human judgment fails, and that sometimes the most dangerous words in aviation are not mayday or engine failure, they are let us keep going. If this story moved you, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below telling me what you think about the decision that were made on that flight. Should the pilot have stayed on the ground? Could anyone have intervened? I want to hear your thoughts, and if you have not already, watch this video next where I break down another devastating incident that shook the entire nation. I will see you there.